you to define the term commitment to purpose. How do you think you would define the term commitment to purpose, both in making societal impact for raising children with disabilities, and in general, my friend, how would you define the term commitment to purpose? What are your thoughts there?
Commitment to purpose, from my own perspective, means, I identify with this world every single day, right? I wake up and it's not just my day job. It's all of the interactions I have with people. It's the relationships I build. It's the friendships I have. Is everything always about disability? No, but everything always somehow has a connection or a link to it. And I am always thinking about how I can be a better servant, be a better helper, be a better support, be a better friend, right? And that looks a lot of different ways. And certainly in the work that I do, I do a lot of writing that I know has been supportive to people, obviously a lot of podcasts like this, speaking, etc. But at the end of the day, I think it's me living my story, being willing to share it with others, and then also to seeing how I can be that good support, friend, mentor to anybody else who might need it. So, and then
A commitment to purpose is just not a concept to my friend John Fela. It's the way that he lives his life. His 16-year-old son, Chris, is nonverbal and he has autism, and Fela has made it his life's mission to advocate for all of the societal rights for his son and children all over the world living with special needs. He's also spent more than 2 decades in the field of special education, covering essentially any role you can think of. He's also spent some time as an inclusive employment job coach, and today he serves as the ministry relations manager for Joni and Friends Chicago, where he works with churches to equip and train them to better integrate the disabled community into the religious and social family, no matter the denomination of the church. He joined me this week to have an in-depth discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion as it relates to successfully raising children with special needs, how our societal practices can improve to better integrate and populate the world with a better sense on how to empower individuals with disabilities and their surrounding community members so that everyone feels a sense of belonging and togetherness. This is a conversation that, if you're a dad, especially with a child with special needs, that you can't afford to miss, because John will give you some food for thought and some practical advice on how to ensure that you can remain emotionally invested in your child's life. So, without further delay, I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Absolutely. So, John, my friend, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program. And I'm super excited to learn about your life's work in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the ministry as well, my friend. Great to see you this afternoon. And thanks for a few minutes, my friend.
absolutely. Thanks, Kevin.
Absolutely. So, John, I wanted to start our conversation by asking you, what does the word or the concept of inclusion for all mean to you? What does that mean to you, my friend?
Well, thanks, Kevin. That's a great question, and it's a great question to actually start off with. And I'm going to speak here as someone who, in terms of my experience with disability, I like to say that I see it from like a 360-degree view. Sometimes I jokingly call myself the Swiss Army knife of disability ministry or advocacy because I do a little bit of everything. But I come at things with the perspective of being a parent. I have a son who's 17 with autism and nonverbal. I'm a former elementary school teacher, including special ed, and I've worked in disability ministry for several years, and certainly in my current job with my organization, Joni and Friends. However, what I would say is most people say they want inclusion in workplaces, in schools, and churches. They want an inclusive environment, and that's great. But what I always caution, especially churches, because that's primarily who I work with, I always remind them that inclusion is a great goal, but it's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is actually acceptance. And what's the difference, right? Because sometimes we toss these words around and they're interchangeable. And inclusion really means that everybody has a place, right? Well, when I work specifically with churches and I talk to them about what that looks like, many churches will have some kind of a program or a disability ministry or maybe a special classroom or sensory room, but it's frequently kind of tucked away somewhere and no one knows that it exists. And the people that are served by that ministry don't really have a connection to the life of the church or the community. So, in that sense, what I say is inclusion means that you have a place, but not everybody may even know you're there or may welcome you in the same way. Whereas with acceptance and belonging, when I use those words, then we are talking about a situation and creating an environment where everyone is welcome and everyone also engages with everybody, certainly on their level, but also has an equal respect for everyone, for their gifts, skills, and talents. And everyone comes to the table with something. And they're not excluded from any opportunities, not only to be a part of the life of a given community, church, school, whatever, but also to give back and engage as well in terms of serving and supporting themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before I ask you about your ministry work, and I'm also curious to ask you about, I'm the one that truly believes that, talent is an equally distributable commodity, but sometimes, access to opportunities when it comes to equitable treatment in society or employment related for people with disabilities isn't always readily available. So how do you think we can create more avenues of opportunities for individuals with disabilities? What are your thoughts there?
That's another great question, and it's a pretty deep one. And I'll use the church example again because that's a wonderful place. And again, I'm saying church. It could be another house of worship or temple or kind of whatever is personal or specific to you. But a lot of times there's natural community, as I like to say, that happens in a church or a house of worship. And so what you see then is there are opportunities for individuals with disabilities to not only engage in the life of the church, but many times, whether it's through like a formal program or ministry, or even just in some other opportunities or connections the church may have to be engaged in the social life of the larger community, maybe getting themselves out in terms of doing projects in the community that they could also assist with, or even just more social opportunities, right? And in that sense, it provides an environment where people that are connected with that group, with that church, with that particular community, can then see opportunities that they may want to extend or help other folks engage with. So if there is, and I also used to do job coaching as well. So I know a little bit about the importance of building connections and relationships because many times individuals would come to us wanting to find a job, but the issue might be that there were some things that they either didn't like to do or maybe a particular environment, especially if it was a larger retail environment or like a restaurant, food, type environment might just be overwhelming for them. Well, what we would do is we would help them to engage with people in the community that were small business owners or folks that had a business maybe that was more in line with something that someone had an affinity for or was good at, And in that sense, then we could not only get them a job, but we could actually create a job that was specific to them. And so the key thread here is relationship and community, right? Because as we work in our communities on the smaller C to help build and develop those relationships, those then extend out to the community with the big C. And then you have environments where people are being supported, not just in, say, schools and churches or another community center type of organizations, but also in the larger community itself. And people, are recognized as having value and working in certain environments, or being a part of the life of things on a whole number of levels. So it starts with the small C, and especially in terms of those intentional relationships that we can build, and then it branches out in terms of how can then we engage our larger world and then build a more, truthfully, a more inclusive and also accepting community.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, John, I know that you're the relations manager for Joni and Friends Chicago, where you collaborate with churches to equip and train them to assist the disabled community to be more active within that community and societal life in general. My friend, so tell me about Joni and Friends and all the good work that you're doing, my friend.
Well, thank you. Yeah, Johnny and Friends is an amazing organization. It was actually founded by a woman, Johnny Erickson Tada. She had a diving accident at the age of 17, all the way back in 1967, and she instantly became a quadriplegic from that accident. She's been a quadriplegic for her entire life. She just turned 75, so it's been 50 years, over 50 years. And, she created this organization back, around the early 1980s. And it really started out as really an outreach from her own home. It's called Johnny and Friends because she literally would get mail sent to her because after her disability, she really struggled with what she was going to do in life, and really had a lot of frustration and anger. And she speaks openly about that. But then she was able to find, some opportunities to really channel her gifts and talent. She's actually an amazing artist who literally paints with the paintbrush in her mouth, and she still paints to this day, and she's done incredible stuff. And some of that got her recognized on a national level, and she started to get letters and responding to letters, and then she finally kind of built this ministry and this organization. So Johnny and Friends currently is in over 30 countries on 5 continents. We do a variety of outreach with families and people with disabilities. We're actually very well known here in the U.S. for a lot of our outreaches with family, including our family retreats, where a family with disability in it could be a child, or let's say maybe even let's say like an older parent, grandparent, etc. That family can all come for a 1 week respite and we have retreat centers around the country. The one that we run out of our Chicago office is up in Michigan, and we do several weeks out of the year, and a family can come for a week and basically be loved on, right? And it's a unique opportunity because one of the hardest things I will tell you for a family of disability is to be able to go on a vacation. And I know that firsthand. But the great thing is that our organization makes it easy because when you come, we basically take everything off your plate. And we have a dedicated one-on-one trained, buddy kind of a thing for the person with the disability, regardless of the age or condition. And then there are programs for everybody in that family. And it is a Christian environment, so we do offer a camp pastor as well. We have time of worship. We have different support groups for moms, dads, etc. So it's a wonderful organization. We also do it, and again, that's just one of our outreaches. We also have other events and things for families and parents of disability. We actually have a global wheelchair ministry where we collect wheelchairs locally and then distribute them to our partners in our various countries around the world. But then my job specifically is to work with churches and to help train them, of churches of any size, any denomination, train them on how to be more accessible, on how to be more inclusive and more accepting. So I do presentations, I do trainings, I support with different resources for volunteers, staff, etc., with the goal that we can have the church be what the church is meant to be and truly be a welcoming place for people with disabilities, but also to be able to bless them, and with some of the things that I mentioned previously in terms of community and other outreach, it's all kind of rolled into there. So it's really about kind of having those churches see the big picture for disability.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, I also know that you spent more than 20 years as an educator on almost every level, my friend. So, education today. People are being asked to do more with less, my friend. So I'm curious, when it comes to special education specifically, what are your thoughts on the current state of the industry of special education and the importance of building a social community within that space as well? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I have a few thoughts. The one thing I will say is, as much as I love teaching, and I really did, I'm glad I'm not doing it anymore. And part of that is because I feel as though education and being an educator means something far different than what it did when I got started 20 years ago, or certainly even when we were kids. The expectations are so much, and in terms of data collecting and monitoring progress and all these things. And it's not to say that those things aren't good or valuable, but the problem is that the job becomes so overwhelming that it's hard to really educate in the traditional way we might think about it. And so I applaud teachers who are still doing it, because that's great. And the other thing I would say too, and I do speak to this, it's interesting because I do get asked a lot of times, being both a parent and a former teacher, what is the impact of having good relationships with parents and families, and kind of making those connections. And I will tell you that that's invaluable, for a couple of reasons. One of the big struggles when you are a parent of a child with a disability is you're always concerned if they are getting the best care, the right care, if the school is addressing their needs. And those are all legitimate questions to ask. Now, I will tell you, my son went to a public school for the majority of his life. He had a great experience. It wasn't perfect, but, they were very agreeable to most of the things that we discussed. And we were also very supportive of that. I realize that's not everyone's experience. There are people who, and I'm also speaking as someone who has taught in both public and private school settings. My son had been in mostly public school, but also private school as well. And I will tell you that, nothing's perfect. Many people like to bash public schools. I will say that the one thing about public schools as compared to private is that most private schools don't have any support for disability. Some do, but many don't. And, legally, folks are entitled to a certain amount of services through their local public school district. But when they attend a private school, those things, they just might not be aware of, whether it's the parents, the staff, the administrators, et cetera. So, what I always say is you want to have a good relationship with parents, because certainly if you're at a public school, ideally, yes, that child is getting what they need. But even if they're not, as a parent, you want to understand how difficult this job is, and the job of teaching, and especially in the special ed world. There's a lot of pressure. And most teachers, I think, are, want to do good and right by the child and the family. But it behooves you to have a good relationship so that communication piece can work a little bit more smoothly. Likewise, in private schools, for example, where those resources might not exist, it might be up to the parents to help to educate some of the teachers and staff more, or to provide resources, or, ways that, a child could be supported in that environment. So there's no perfect place, and there's no one size fits all, as they say. But I do think that having good, healthy relationships and open communication with teachers and families and parents really makes that whole process a lot easier. I can speak to it firsthand of both the good and the bad side. And I know how much I appreciated as a parent when my son's teachers and staff would work with us. And likewise, as a teacher, I also very much appreciated when parents could have an open and honest dialogue with me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, I know you're looking to trademark the phrase or the title Swiss Army Knife Disability Advocacy, my friend. And I know that because you have been involved in almost every level of the special education system uh, throughout your journey, my friend. So, having cerebral palsy myself, my friend, I went through the whole gamut when it comes to special education. So I'm curious to have a dialogue with you about the quality or where you think special education is improving but still needs a work. My friend, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I feel as though the one great thing about our environments today, whether it's the traditional mainstream classroom or the special ed room, the nature and the level of reporting and data collection is so much more than it used to be, right? And really that kind of guides the instruction, so to speak, in a lot of environments. So I think we have a lot of measuring tools at our disposal, kind of a thing. And I also feel as though one of the thing that and I'm not saying that this exists in every school, but I also feel as though um, teachers in schools are also becoming as they become a little bit more agreeable to parent suggestions and information. You also find that a lot of teachers and therapists at schools, also are aware of a lot of new whether it's protocols or treatments, type of a thing. And everyone kind of has their own thing, and I'm not gonna solicit or endorse anything here. But the fact is that a lot of folks are aware of different ways to approach teaching in a given school environment. And I found that a lot of teachers that we've worked with, my son at least, have been agreeable to suggestions, let's say we've gotten from a therapist, or maybe there's something we learned about or read about, kind of a thing. And so that really is appreciated, again, going back to that point about working with the families. But in terms of where we need to get to, I really do think, and again, it's one of the main reasons why I'm glad I'm not teaching anymore, is because there's so much emphasis on data collection and not as much on the holistic development of the child. Now, I will say that in a lot of schools, they are implementing more social emotional curriculums, more things based on meditation and growth mindset and that type of thing. And those are all great, right? But we also need to foster an environment where that's kind of pervasive. It's not just something we can tell kids, okay, now be calm for 5 minutes, or let's meditate for 2 minutes, and now the rest of the day is chaos. These environments need to really demonstrate that they're embracing a lot of these ideas, kind of thing. So I think that schools are more open to a little bit more of a holistic approach in terms of the things I've seen. I don't think we're there yet. And I think especially as it relates to special ed, because just like I say, there's no one size fits all or no perfect solution, whether it's for a school or a treatment or a therapy or anything. Likewise, every child is different, regardless of being special ed or not. But especially with the kids that I've worked with, you find how specifically unique each child and each individual is. And so how are you responding to their behavior, to the way that they engage with, certain expectations, or, activities you have in the environment? How are you adjusting for, what you're seeing from them, kind of a thing? And I think good teachers do that already. But I'm encouraged by the fact that I feel like we need to be returning to more of a holistic kind of approach to raising and teaching a child, right? And incorporating things that are not just based on data collection or expectations of doing a particular activity 10 times in a row. It really has to be on what are we really seeing from that child's growth overall. And sometimes that can be demonstrated or show up some different ways. But I think we need just a little bit of a bigger picture approach, and not one that as much is focused on expectations that can always be recorded data wise, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, I know you have a personal connection to this cause with your son having autism and being a nonverbal, my friend. So I'm curious about the special bond you hold with your son, and why you think he has a superpower, my friend.
Well, my son's superpower is, well, I will tell you what I've learned from him. Okay. First of all, and this is probably the most important for me, I've learned how to be a kinder, more giving, and more open person. He has taught me a level of empathy that I did not have, right? I'd always like to say I was a good person, a kind person, a friendly person. But when you have a child with a disability, that takes you to a whole other level, right? And so I'm grateful to him for that. And also the fact that even though he's nonverbal and he really hasn't communicated a lot in his life, at least not verbally, the fact is he's had a great impact on people that have worked with him. And it's a great impact because, there are people who have just said not only how much they enjoyed working with them, but how working with them wanted them to maybe pursue a slightly different avenue in, let's say, special ed or therapy, for example, kind of thing. Or just the fact that, they found how just joyful of a kid he was. And they may not even really be able to understand what that's about or maybe what he was feeling in a given moment, but you could see just the joy and the excitement and the happiness that radiates from him, as do with a lot of our kids with disabilities, especially the ones that are nonverbal. We don't necessarily know what they're thinking, but we can see on their face, we can see in their body language how they're again reacting to a certain environment or person or whatever. And for him, I think he's had a huge impact on the people that he's worked with and that have been around him. And so in that sense, it's also a reminder to me to never diminish the value of anyone, because you don't know the impact that they're going to have on someone's life. And even if they never say a word to you, they can still have that impact. I know there are kids that I have worked with and young people in that realm as well who definitely have had an impact on me, right? But it begins with my son, and so I will tell you, the greatest gift that he gave me was honestly just being a kinder, gentler person for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Johnny, you brought up the idea of resilience and acceptance earlier. So I'm curious to ask you, how do you define resilience and acceptance from an equitable and equality standpoint? What are your thoughts on the idea of prosperity, my friend?
On prosperity for individuals with disabilities, you mean?
Yeah, of people with special needs or disabilities. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it kind of goes back to what we've also already discussed, which is that, we have to start embracing as a culture that everyone has a gift or a talent or something remarkable, right? And the problem is, I'm sure you're familiar with the word ableism, and that's a word that kind of gets tossed around a lot in our culture now too. It's the idea that people with disabilities, just can't do on their own, and so people always need to be coming beside them. But the problem is that then that limits our possibilities and their potential for engaging with them and them engaging in their environments and giving back and serving and showing their gifts and talents. And so, what we need to be looking at here again is, how do we really plug into people and how do we really get the best out of them, whatever that is and whatever that looks like, right? And I think we're so programmed in our culture on this aspect of care. We want to care for people with disabilities. We want to make sure they're okay. We want to make sure they have what they need, and that's great. We need to be doing that. But let's also remember that they are people too with desires, with interests, with passions, with gifts, and with things that are truly valuable to us as a society. And I certainly saw that again in my time as a job coach, because again, you see where someone actually fits really well doing a particular job. Right. And that's because they have a desire for it and they have, the right acumen for it and just, kind of the right, just the right personality to fit into a particular role. So we don't want to diminish that. And so we want to be encouraging people with disabilities to not only have a job for the sake of having a job, but to have a job they really enjoy. And if they have a job they really enjoy, then there can be prosperity there. It may or may not be financial, but it definitely can be prosperous in terms of the effects it has on that person's life, right? And so we can measure prosperity in some of those, different ways, so to speak. So I think we always need to be looking at every person as a whole person, regardless of physical limitations, cognitive, etc. Um, everyone has value. What do they bring, and how can we then encourage them and bring that out of them so that they don't just have a job for the sake of having a job or live independently just because we think maybe they should do that. It's because they are thriving as people, as individuals, and adults. That's where we need to get to as a culture and society.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned specifically, my friend, that you got into this work because you looked at the landscape of parenting for children with special needs, and you saw a gap in the level of support for dads specifically when it comes to supporting their kids with special needs in terms of building community or resources, as we've already talked about. So I'm curious to ask you, what do you think are the steps the general public can take to better support dads specifically if they're raising children with special needs? What are your thoughts then?
On dads raising kids with special needs and those supports.
Yeah, sure, we'll
Yeah.
go with that. Yeah. What are your thoughts on how the general public can help better support dads specifically who are raising children with special needs?
Yeah, and that's a big thing too right now because in our culture, what I've seen is that there are lots of supports for moms of disability, right? And that's okay. We love our moms. My son's mom, I'm actually divorced from her, but my son's mom is an excellent mom. And they need support and they need all of that. But so do men. And the problem also too in our culture now is we're in a place where, the divorce rate for special needs is astronomically high. I'm not even going to quote the number because I know the number changes, but basically it is much higher than the average. And there are different reasons for that. But the fact remains is that for those families that stay together, right, they are usually under an intense amount of stress. But then when there is divorce or when there's separation, there are a lot of men who, quite honestly, they can't handle raising a child with a disability. There are absentee fathers, there are dads who just walk away, but there are a lot of dads that stay. And there are a lot of dads, just like myself and a lot of dads that I know, that want to do right and want to do our best for our kids. Even if we're in a parenting situation where, there's divorce or it also in my case, remarriage. My son has a stepmom now. So, the issue is that we kind of lean towards supporting mom, but what about the men? And not only are those things not well, they're not there as much as the moms. It's not that they're not there, but men are also not as good about seeking them out. Right. They're not as good about seeking them out, about finding them, about admitting that maybe it's something they need. Right. So I think what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're shining a light, one, on families and parents of disability for sure, because we'd love for them to be supported to stay together as much as possible. But when there's whether there's a divorce or not, how are we supporting those men, right? Because men and dads deal with some different issues than moms, and they process things differently, and they have a different experience. And that very much was what I saw for myself and for a lot of guys I know. So what I would really want the public to know is we need more resources and more focus on dads, right? In those places, whether it's through schools or therapy clinics or other, community outreach. If you're doing something for parents and maybe you're thinking about doing something for moms, make sure you're doing something for dads too, right? And I will tell you that I've got a lot of great resources for dads. Luckily, there are wonderful special need dad organizations I'm connected with. Special Fathers Network is one that I always mention. So if you look up Special Fathers Network online, that's an amazing organization, and I highly endorse that one. But there are others as well. So I would say get connected. Someone can always reach out to me and ask me a question. I'm always happy to get you either connected or share the resources I have on that end. But the one thing that I will say for our special needs dads listening to this is don't do this alone. Whether you're married, whether you're divorced, whatever your situation is, don't do it alone. Even if you just have one person to talk to, get at least one person, because I know the experience of not having anyone to talk to and how challenging that was. And I intentionally had to try to find that for myself and in some ways either find it or build it or create it or both. So definitely don't do it alone if you are a dad going through that, and also to make sure that we're kind of sharing those resources when they're available so that guys are aware of it.
Yeah, and to that point, just one follow up on that question: How do you think? How do you think we can emotionally make sure that dads are invested? Do you think it's as simple as giving them the social capital to feel supported and the necessary resources? But how do you think we can reverse the thinking of dads also about being emotionally invested in raising a child with special needs? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, and that it's a unique challenge because men just process stuff differently. And that's some of the advice I also give to dads too, is that remember that your child is your child, right? A lot of what happens with guys is when you have a child with a disability, parents always have dreams for their kids. And especially guys, and especially if it's a male child, right? Because they want to do all of these activities with the son. They want to go hiking and fishing or hunting or play basketball or travel sports or whatever it is. And then if the reality is they're not doing any of that and they can't connect with the child, then they either just kind of give up or what you see a lot of, and I have had lots of moms and dads admit to this and tell me this, is that they just throw themselves into their work, right? They throw themselves into their work and they work really hard, make a lot of money so I can pay for all of these, therapies and all of this other associated stuff. And the problem is that then you become emotionally distanced from your child, right? And so what I always remind dads is your child is your child. You may not be able to connect with them in the way you thought of, but that doesn't mean that you can't connect with them. So, a perfect example of me and my son likes to watch sports on TV, right? He doesn't have the motor skills to really play. He does some swimming and stuff, but he can't play like anything coordinated with a ball or whatever. But he loves watching football on TV. He loves watching basketball. And when his mom and myself were still married, we had a basketball hoop in our driveway, and I'd go out there and I'd shoot hoops with him. Now, he doesn't have the motor skills to shoot the ball, but he loves it when I do. And whether I make it or miss it, he claps and he cheers because he just loves seeing the ball go up in the air, and then we'll pass it back to each other and all that kind of thing. If that's the extent of what he can do, great. You know, I don't see that as a defeat. I see that as a win. And as much as in my head, boy, I love basketball. I'd love to see my kid playing high school, college, or something. And that's not going to happen, but that's all right because we still had that experience together. So for a lot of guys, it's changing their expectations, which is very hard, especially when that guilt and shame comes in of, why my kid and especially why my son. But if we can get beyond that, then you can see a lot of the gifts that that child brings and also the ways that you can connect with that child. Again, it's going to look different. It's maybe not going to be what you thought or maybe what the guy next door or your other buddy is doing with their child, but at the same time, it still can have meaning. And it really obviously still is very important to that child and can have a lot of impact on them, moving forward.
Yeah, and John, if I were in a room of 100 parents who didn't have, who didn't have a child or children with special needs, and I told you you had about an hour with them to dispel some of the misconceptions that may exist in society today. I'm curious, my friend, how would you spend your hour in sort of demystifying some of these misconceptions, my friend? What are your thoughts there?
And would that be just for parents or dads or?
Parents specifically who don't have children with special needs, and that you want to help them better understand some common misconceptions so that if their kids are in the same environment and they want to make friends with someone with special needs or etc. How do you think we can get parents who don't have kids with disabilities in the same rowboat, my friend? What are your thoughts there?
So it definitely is a challenge with parents of disability to have friendships and relationships with folks that don't, with typical families, so to speak. That's a very challenging thing. Now, it's not that it doesn't exist. I've had many friends with who did not have a child with a disability, whether they had, kids or not, married or single, whatever. But I would tell you, it's far easier to have friends, where there is a disability because they just get it, right? They just do. So, to your question, if I had an hour with those kind of families, here's what I would just really encourage them to do. Um, you don't have to be super educated on a topic, right? You don't need to read 100 books before you engage with a family. Likewise, you don't need to necessarily worry about, okay, what question should I ask, or how should I say things, or what should I say? You just want to be a friend, right? You want to be a friend the same way that you would welcome, if there's a family with disability that moves into your neighborhood, you want to treat them like any other family, right? And it's not that you can't ask questions, but a lot of people are afraid to, because they're, and certainly a lot of language has changed, and there's, person first language and all that, so people are very, touchy about should I go there? And for the most part, I would tell you a family like mine and other families I know would say it's fine. You can ask a question. We know if you're being sincere or not, and maybe you don't use the right language or the right term. That's okay. Because you know what, you're showing interest, and that's great. We're more than happy to talk to you. We're more than happy to explain it to you. Very similarly, and I think this is a great point, and this is a great suggestion. One thing that my son's mom and I would always do, both for his mainstream classroom at school, but also at church for his Sunday school room, we would do awareness talks, right? And this is a very valuable tool for families with disability, because what we would do is we would go to these classroom environments, we would talk to them about our son Chris. And we would say, hey, you know what? Let's show you some pictures. This is all the stuff he likes to do. He probably likes a lot of the same stuff you do. But here's the thing. Here's where he's different. Here's where he's not going to communicate the same. Here's where, he needs some help in some areas, right? And this is how you can be a friend to him. You would be amazed at the level and the amount of the walls that come down when you have that open dialogue. And likewise with parents too, because again, it is about understanding and awareness. And for a lot of people who have not been around disability, they just don't get it. And that goes for kids and adults. So the awareness talks really helped. And again, helping to formulate some relationships with typical friends in those places, but also too for the teachers and staff, for them to understand better as well. And then in the same way, even with parents, it's this idea that, hey, you know what, information is great. It's great to engage families with disability and ask the questions. Like, that's fine as long as you're respectful. We honor that. But what you don't want to do is just ignore us, right? Because one, we are people like you, and two, as great as it is to have families that get it, and that is very important, and I really suggest that parents on this journey make sure they have those. We also want just regular old friends too, right? In terms of wherever you're at in life, kids, no kids, whatever that is. We experience life the same way anybody else does. So engage us that way, right? And again, don't be afraid to ask questions, but at the same time, also, be have the courage and have the initiative to open your doors maybe to a family like ours, or to knock on a door of a family like ours, because it really means a lot. It really means a lot to us, and it can actually go a very far way.
Yeah, absolutely. John, in a couple of minutes I have left with you today, buddy, I wanted to ask you about the whole notion of this, my friend. I have a belief system that life is our victory lap, my friend, and it's one of the creeds that I live my life by, is that life is your victory lap. So I'm curious, how do you think we can empower children with special needs as they age and as they form their own special identity of purpose, my friend, about how we can empower them to take control of their own lives? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think it also goes back to really a lot of what we've talked about. I think that we have to remember to start from a place that everybody has value. And then how are we plugging into, and how are we helping those folks to see their own value? And then how are we helping to support that and bring it out? And likewise too, I'm encouraged by a lot of the things that I see out in society now. I'm encouraged by the way that everything is just way more inclusive and accessible, whether that's physical accessibility, or whether that's, being able to see more people with disabilities in churches or at different community events, having sensory friendly or disability friendly events in communities and that type of thing. All of that is really great. And it's important because it's going to help to foster an environment of inclusion and acceptance. And then from there, we can really help to provide more opportunities for folks who where maybe those doors were closed, because it really is an awareness issue. And that's really what I talk to churches about. A lot of folks are just afraid of what they don't understand. So let's make everybody aware. And the more we can do that, the better. And the one last thing that I'll really emphasize here too, and the reason why it's critical for society as a whole, but even certainly everybody with that, not just the big C of community, but the small C people in our neighborhoods and schools and churches, to embrace disability. Is, I have a son who doesn't have any siblings. He's got no brothers or sisters. He's an only child, and I'm an only child, and his mom is an only child. So one day he's going to be old enough to where mom and dad will be gone, and extended family may not be there, and anybody else he knew growing up. Who will be his community, right? Who will be the people to wish him a happy birthday, Merry Christmas, give him a hug, whatever, right? Think about that and then consider how communities with a small C and then a big C could reach out to him, right? How can people in your neighborhoods, churches, or other community organizations be a friend to him now, but also for the future? Because one day he may not have anyone, right? And those places, those environments, those organizations will be his lifeline. And that's really what we're going for. We're going for a world where it's not just that we're supported, but that people just don't feel alone, because there is so much isolation for families of disability, for individuals with disability. How can we really lift them up and make sure they know that they have got people supporting them all the way through?
Yeah, and John, on a personal note, I just got back from Oklahoma last night. I was the keynote speaker on Tuesday for the Association for Supported Employment in Oklahoma. They had their national conference on Tuesday. And one of the messages I left the group with was the importance of making sure that children with disabilities, and ultimately as they age, create their own sense of personal identity from an employment perspective. I'm also the chair of the Family Advisory Council for our local children's treatment center where I live. And one of the reasons I agreed to do that is because we also have established a transition to adulthood program for children with special needs, my friend. So I'm curious to get your perspective on the needs to cultivate relationships with our business community and those that work in the employment field, so that folks with disabilities, as they age and become teenagers and young adults, have a shot at an equitable shot at meaningful employment. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Absolutely. And you know what, as I mentioned, I spent time as a job coach, and this is actually a presentation I do at some conferences as well, specifically on employment. So I know you mentioned supported employment. So when I was a job coach, we were certainly trained on supported employment, but also on customized employment. And the difference there, which you may know, but the difference there is that many times folks, just like my son, for example, goes through like a high school transition program. He gets a job as part of that program. It might be again at a retail store or a hotel or food service something, and it's a job, and he's learning valuable skills, and he may enjoy doing it. But maybe that job is, not waiting for him at the end of that particular program. Maybe that job will decide to not keep him on, or maybe there's some other issue with him doing that job long term. So when we looked at customized employment, that model is really based on what we would refer to as human capital, which is a fancy way for saying, ask your friends and neighbors, ask your relatives. Joey really likes working with animals, right? Is there anybody who maybe owns their own pet store, or maybe does something with animals that would be easy for him to plug into, because Joey actually has a lot of experience working with animals and volunteering and taking care of them at home and all these things. He just may not be able to work in a traditional retail environment, but he still might be really good with them. So how do we create that? And again, we would lean into a lot of small businesses, but also those businesses where there was maybe a family connection, or even better, I worked with a couple of young adults where they had a personal connection to the place they worked because they had been coming there for years. whether it was a dentist's office that they had grown up seeing that dentist, or maybe again another a food supermarket grocery type of an environment where the family had shopped for years, and everybody there that worked there just knew the family and knew that person. So those are great ways. Again, thinking about that small C developing into that big C about how we can be supporting people long term. But yeah, that vision really um, is going to be dependent on and really leans into a lot of the relationship building that we can have with local community leaders, businesses, and especially chambers of commerce, for example. That's a great environment. I attended many chamber of commerce meetings when I was working as a job coach in my area, and I would tell you those were invaluable too, because you got to meet people from a lot of different businesses, a lot of different walks of life, but also people who had employed some of our young adults and actually had wonderful testimonies about that. And so, in that sense, that's a great way for you to help develop again new relationships and new job opportunities, and again make certain that the job that the individual is placed in is not just a job for the sake of having a job. It's something they actually want to do, like to do, and are going to enjoy doing moving forward.
Yeah, I've got a trio of questions left. Three quick ones for you, my friend. I'm also curious to follow up, based on your experience as a job coach and working in inclusive employment. What would be your message for managers who are in a hiring position, whether it be small business, whether it be on the corporate level, about the importance of hiring folks with disabilities and the competitive edge it can bring to an organization? What are your thoughts there?
Well, it would almost be the same thing that I have in conversations with churches now, because see, the one of the concerns that I think a lot of workplaces has, and obviously there are plenty of laws to help shield and protect individuals with disabilities in these workplaces, but at the same time, when I talk to a church about having some kind of a program or welcoming people or opening doors, I remind them that there is value in bringing that family in or that person in. You may see it as a burden because you think to yourself, how can I support this person? How can we help this person? How can we make this work? But the reality is that there are gifts to that person coming into your space that you might not realize in terms of gifts and talents or ways that they also want to give back too. So, with a lot of these folks in these management supervisory positions who might be hesitant, what I would say is one, a lot of times the fear comes from just not knowing. And if maybe it's not an experience that either your workplace has had, or maybe more specifically that you haven't had, you want to have those conversations with, the people involved from the given organization, whether it's, say, like a job coach, whether it's another form of a transition program, whether it's even from the parents themselves. Be open to those conversations and listen. And the other thing too, when we speak about customized employment and helping folks get jobs, a big valuable tool also is something we call a living resume, which basically is it's essentially like a PowerPoint showing examples or giving examples of all of the various things a person has done, can do, and is interested in doing. Because then it kind of makes it come alive for the person. Because if you just tell someone, my son or this person is really good at doing this, it might not go as far as saying, you know what, let me show you some examples of things they've done and why they could be an asset here. And then not only is that going to be a great opportunity for them to engage that individual, but maybe open the door for other folks, but also what does it say, again, to the community? Small c and then big C. It says, our business, our organization, this environment, we are welcoming to people and families of disability. Oh, by the way, families of disability love to spread the good word about places that are being supportive to their kids like their own, and also families like their own. And so that business may actually not just get more opportunities in terms of people with disability to hire, but certainly a lot more families and individuals in that community that want to then support that business, right? And so those are kind of the fringe effects of welcoming someone in through the doors that people don't see at first, but the reality is that there's a lot more to gain, and it's just a matter of, again, it's a matter of awareness, letting your guard down, and being open to the possibilities.
Yeah, and now, John, I'm going to combine my last two questions because I think they're interconnected. And I'm Curious, I asked you earlier about parents who don't have kids with disabilities and how we can better educate them. But I also wanted to ask you about if you have a message to families that are going through the process of raising a child with special needs and they may be feeling a little burnt out or in need of sort of a pick me up, my friend. What are your message to that group of people? And I think it ties into your overall life and your legacy and what you want your legacy to be defined as, my friend. So I'm curious, what would be your message to parents raising kids with disabilities? And how do you think it ties into how you want your personal and professional legacy to be remembered, my friend? What are your thoughts there?
So I vividly remember a time when um, my son's mom and I, when we were married, were going through a very, very difficult time. And I actually speak to it in some of my presentations at conferences too. And it was a time when we had no community. We had, very little in terms of resources, friends. Quite honestly, I was on the verge of suicide because everything was going wrong and nothing was working. And what I realized was that I couldn't do this alone, right? I needed people. And I just didn't need friends and family. I needed people who understood me and what I was going through as a parent of disability. And so what I would encourage everybody to say to do here is, and if I have one message you'll listen to or a piece of advice, it is don't do this alone, right? You need people. You need others to walk alongside you, even if it's one parent or one family. And in terms of legacy, what I've always said is, especially with guys, if a special needs dad doesn't have anybody to talk to and I'm the only guy he can talk to, that's okay because I know what it's like to not have anyone. And maybe I can pass you along to someone who maybe can help you better, but I would never say no to talking to a dad, in terms of where disability is involved, or really for a dad for any reason, but especially in this case. And so that's my advice to parents is don't do it alone. Find a community. If you can't find a community, I'm also a person that you can reach out to because I can definitely help direct you in that way. Sometimes it's a matter of finding a community. Sometimes it's a matter of creating your own, and maybe sometimes a little bit of both, usually. But don't do it alone. And if my legacy is anything, it's that I want to be remembered as a person who at least helped one guy or one family. If I've done that, then that's great because I know what it meant for someone to do that for me. If I've done that for one, and if I do it for more than one, which I probably will when all is said and done, then awesome. But that is really the greatest gift I could give and receive.
Yeah, just before I ask you how people can get connected with you, you sparked my interest to ask this one follow up, my friend, and that is if I asked you to define the term commitment to purpose, how do you think you would define the term commitment to purpose, both in making societal impact for raising children with disabilities, and in general, my friend, how would you define the term commitment to purpose? What are your thoughts there?
Commitment to purpose, from my own perspective, means, I identify with this world every single day, right? I wake up and it's not just my day job. It's all of the interactions I have with people. It's the relationships I build. It's the friendships I have. Is everything always about disability? No, but everything always somehow has a connection or a link to it. And I am always thinking about how I can be a better servant, be a better helper, be a better support, be a better friend, right? And that looks a lot of different ways. And certainly in the work that I do, I do a lot of writing that I know has been supportive to people. Obviously, a lot of podcasts like this, speaking, etc. But at the end of the day, I think it's me living my story, being willing to share it with others, and then also to seeing how I can be that good support, friend, mentor to anybody else who might need it. So, and then in terms of how to get a hold of me, so I'm you can plug my name into the interweb or into the Google machine, as I like to joke. I'm kind of all over there. I will say that for those of you who do a search for me under my name, John Fela, please know that I recently underwent a name change because I had a name from my previous marriage, which was Felageller. So Felageller. So if you search me online, you might find stuff that says Felageller. Just know it's the same guy, but it's just that I recently went back to my old original name. But I have a website, johnfella.com. You can find most of my stuff on there in terms of my content, again, writing, speaking, podcasts, etc. You can reach out to me on social media, Facebook. I have actually a Facebook page called John Special Needs Blog on Facebook. I'm on Instagram at John_Fella_1, or just put my name and you'll probably get me on Instagram. I'm also on X and LinkedIn as well, just under my name, just do a search. And again, otherwise, plug my name into Google and you'll find me. And if you would like to reach out to me, there's contact information on my website, Facebook as well. Please feel free to send me a message, email. Happy to talk to you always.
Absolutely. Well, John, this was certainly an extensive and intensive conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And considering the climate that we're living in today, my friend, I really appreciate your willingness to open up and your openness to having such a vulnerable but important conversation. And I want to thank you for the good work that you're doing in the ministry and for children with special needs. It was a real honor to engage in conversation with you this afternoon. And I want to thank you for being here, my friend. It's most appreciated.
Thank you so much. It was great to be with you, Kevin.